Russia is waging another war, the effect of which might not be that obvious, but most certainly is underestimated in the media around the globe. Russia and Saudi Arabian oil market clashes, explained in, I hope, easy terms in this very episode. Another underestimated topic is Russian military draft on TOC, temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. We're talking about Ukrainians forced by Russia to fight against Ukrainians. And an interview, Alexander Khara, the Center for Defense Strategies expert, live in our studio. Very good afternoon. There's topics in more detail in our weekly episode with Henry Keane and UATV English, doing our best to bring the hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Russian oil addiction is absolute. Lies, war and oil is the unholy trinity of Russian economy. Politico puts it very straightforward. Riyadh is increasingly frustrated with other petrostates, including Russia very much, failure to coordinate on cutting supply to raise oil prices about $100 per barrel, up to the current $70. Oil traders say Saudi Arabia is now set to respond by flexing its muscles and turning the tables on smaller producers, exporting more oil itself to grab market share and profits even as prices fall. That strategy will absolutely sink oil prices and spell very bad news for Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. Oil and gas have been the largest source of revenue for the Russian state over the past decade, making up as much as at least half of the country's budget. And in times of war, Russian budget not only depends on oil, it literally becomes an oil of the war. Mikhail Krutichin, a Russian energy analyst who, for some reason based in Norway, puts in even more straightforward way than Politico does, next Saudi Arabia's highly likely move poses an enormous threat, he says, for Russian state budget because of obvious, overwhelming dependency on oil revenues. And it's just one of several unpredictable factors on Putin's event horizon, including the US presidential election. Well, don't get me wrong, I know that Russia is big and rich, and I'm not expecting it to stop being Russia all of a sudden and stop its criminal endeavor in Ukraine. All I am saying that everything in this world comes at a price. And it took Ukraine just one drone to do this. So hard truth being spoken in easy terms is what surely happens after Saudi Arabia will drop prices down even to super low of $20 is that Riyadh will be selling oil at a profit of $5 per barrel anyway, simply because production cost there is only $15 per barrel. In Russia, production costs, though, are $35 per barrel, and it makes it $15 net loss per one barrel for an economy that is at least 50%, some experts even say 70%, addicted to oil revenues, at times of exhausting war and world economic sanctions, and an indicted, usurped Tsar, actually, that is not going to stop at anything to show he is winning, even if that will cause an economical collapse of his country. Would mean that after Riyadh actually sinks the price, the next Ukrainian drone that hits Russian oil refinery would not cause any fire, as there will be simply nothing to burn. Again, I'm not in any way saying it is happening right now or tomorrow, as already today oil prices soared in anticipation of an Israeli strike on Iran's oil refinery. The price of American WTI is up by 5.5% and reached almost $74 per barrel. The price of Brent is up to almost $78. In general, oil price jumped up for 8% during only 1 week. A major strike by Israel on Iran's export capacity could take 1.5 million barrels of oil per day off the market. Disruption of logistics in the Persian Gulf also will pump oil prices by from $13 to $28 possibly per barrel. That all brings Russia money. Yes, of course. But same of course, it takes money back from Russia when the market agitation is over. And all this swinging in between the oil barrels only makes it more obvious how true American Senator John McCain was once when was saying, Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country. How would you like an idea that your family member that has been captured by the enemy is being drafted into enemy's army and then sent to the battlefield to kill you. Amazing cynicism, is it not?
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine expresses a strong protest with regard to the forced mobilization of Ukrainian citizens to the Russian armed forces, which is carried out by the Russian Federation in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. The Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, parts of the Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, in the framework of the so-called Autumn Draft. By carrying out the so-called conscription in these territories, the Russian Federation grossly violates its international legal obligations, in particular under the Fourth Geneva Convention relative to the protection of the civilian persons in time of war, according to which the occupying power is prohibited to force people to serve in its armed or auxiliary forces, as well as to exert pressure and spreading propaganda in favor of voluntary enlistment to the army, from the statement of the MFA of Ukraine.
According to a decree signed by Russian dictator Putin on September 30th, Russia is planning to draft 133,000 Russians between October and January. Men aged from 18 to 30 will be drafted as part of the regular fall conscription campaign. The decree applies to Russians who are not in the reserve and are subject to military service. But the thing is, this time the fall 2023 conscription campaign includes the illegally annexed areas of Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia oblasts of Ukraine. Evading the draft has been relatively easy in Russia until now. All those wanted to avoid military service needed to do just one thing: to avoid receiving a paper draft notice at all cost. One option was to move out of your declared address without letting the authorities know, an actual one, so that the notice couldn't be delivered. Now these new laws in Russia close that loophole, as the draft notice will be considered served a week after it has been posted online on a government website. Yes, as simple as that. Whether you got it or not, you are drafted anyway. Moscow was never able to stop young people who feared being drafted leaving Mother Russia in large numbers. Some sources report of 700,000 people leaving in September 2022 alone. But with the war in Ukraine continuing, Moscow intends to prevent the exodus of new cannon fodder. And to do so, Russian Tsar this time wants Ukrainians on TOC of Ukraine to be drafted to his criminal army and sent to battlefield. As nothing in the world, Russian Tsar would love to see more than a Ukrainian killing a Ukrainian. A diplomat, a foreign affairs and security policy expert at the Center of Defense Strategies, and the nicest personality I know. Alexander Hara is very much live in this very studio at UATV English. Hello, Alex.
Hello, pleasure to be here.
Pleasure is all mine. Well, let's start with China. You don't mind, probably?
No, I don't.
No, you know.
It's a nice country
it
with a rough regime.
Nicely put. All right, so Xi Jinping recently said, let me quote it, China will guard peace together with Moscow. Well, whatever Comrade Xi says, he says it regularly, but is that a relationship that Putin can actually rely on?
Well, first of all, let me be not a diplomat here, and I'll call it oxymoron, because it's not possible to be with Russia and aim for peace and the war, the largest conflict in Europe since 1945, with all signs of genocide and war crimes and other things. So if Beijing sides with Moscow on that, certainly he is not aiming to peace. He's aiming to aid his junior partner how to get out of this corner, I would say. Even though Russia is not losing now, but it's definitely not winning, and it's on the peak of its possibilities, and just like to generate forces and to get assistance from other friends from the international illiberal, I mean Iran, DPRK, and some other countries. And that's why just like China wants to help general partner, and it wants to help it for the aim to get better relations, or at least more stable relations with the European Union and NATO. Because
Right.
now the Chinese are fearful of secondary sanctions in other actions of the United States and their European allies that are implied, or they've been imposed on China
Right.
because of the support of the Russian aggression in Ukraine.
So it's like more to trade, you know, to buy the peace now than to trade with the West whatever they can get from Russia. Is that
Well, they're getting from Russia everything they want,
Exactly.
political
That's my point.
concessions, and mostly the cheap resources that Russia is trying.
Absolutely.
Just one of the examples, the Russians has been trying to sell to the Chinese the gas pipeline for at least a decade. And Chinese were refusing, and they were not interested in that for several reasons. First of all, they are a coal-dependent country. They have, I believe, 8 or 9 LNG terminals. They can buy on spot market everything they want. So there is no need to have this tube. But the Chinese were ready to accept that if Russians would finance that. And then the Chinese want to buy the Russian gas on the domestic Russian prices, which is, well, it's a crazy thing. So I believe that the Russians would go finally with this proposal because they need assistance, they need cash inflow to carry on with this war and just to substitute what they've lost in Europe.
So, Xi Jinping, China, Orban, Hungary, Fico, Slovakia, De Silva, Brazil. These people call themselves a friend of peace, whatever that means. So, and want a peace summit in friendship and maybe even love in the after party in Ibiza, I don't know, but maybe with Zelensky and Putin. Can you please comment on that? Because I'm at loss of words. Like Brazil and China and Hungary and Slovakia want to make a peace summit where they can propose a peace summit of a piece of Ukraine for Russia.
Well, yes, you're right. Putin is a peace-loving gentleman. He wants a piece of Ukraine, a piece of Moldova, a piece of Georgia, and possibly a piece of Poland as well. So, firstly, if you're talking about this particular company, Kazi company, and Brazil, when Miss Rousseff was a president back in 2014, the Brazilian government and its permanent representative to the United Nations didn't vote for territorial integrity of Ukraine. They just abstained. And this government is constantly on the side of Russia, rather the international law, and then Ukraine. It's because at that time, in 2022, there was the conservative president, Bolsonaro, that Brazil voted for the condemnation of the Russian aggression. So there is a constant position of the party that Mr.
So there's nothing new.
There is nothing new. Secondly, because he's a Marxist, he sees that not Russia an empire that wants to get back Ukraine as a colony, but he sees that the United States is an empire that wants to irritate Russia somehow by pushing Ukraine and just like provoking this conflict by expanding NATO and all the rubbish like that. The Chinese are, it's clear, we've been talking about it before. So the Chinese goal is to push slightly or slowly the United States from this chair of the hegemon and take this chair. And they don't want to do it, they are not in rush. They have time before them. And Russians do not have. And this is one of the reasons that they started this overt war in 2022. And the Chinese don't want to irritate Americans. That's why they are happy that they have a junior partner that is waging this war and trying to demolish international rules-based order. And the Brazilians are supportive of Chinese approach because they are not happy with Europeans and with Americans. So they're siding with that. So they want to have a new world order. Each and every country, each and one leader wants to have its own system. The Russians want to have a tripolar world. The United States, China, and Russia is ruling the world. Chinese are thinking about bipolar world, and actually Xi Jinping, when he was meeting with Joe Biden, he proposed. He said that the world is large enough for two countries to flourish. It's actually, he proposed these spheres of influence of the United States and China. But what's interesting, after that, Joe Biden was asked by a journalist whether Xi Jinping is an authoritarian leader or something like that, and he said yes, he is. So the reply of Mr. Biden says that he is not in mood to agree on sphere of influence. He is still supporting the value-based approach in the foreign policy.
But it seems to me more or less everyone is more or less happy with the situation. Talking about everyone wants to rule the world, like this, in this song. So someone is discussing it, someone is trying to get it by force. There people are forgetting that actually Ukraine is fighting for it, for the survival. It's an existential war. So China says something, then takes it all back. Do you really believe that Putin does not understand that China is no partner in a long-term relationship? It's way too powerful, way too big, and would definitely not trade its relationship for the future for decades with West for what in Russia?
No, he does understand it because even in 1990s, Mr. Primakov, who used to be prime minister, he is a KGB guy and other things. So there is an informal Primakov doctrine which says that Russia needs to regain its control over the Soviet space. It needs to get or keep NATO in its place, not allow it to get closer to Russia. To leverage leverage China against the United States. So at that time he knew that Russia is so weak, and it's impossible to repeat the history of the Cold War when the Soviet Union was so powerful and able to just together to control a lot of territories and channel them, to stream them against the capitalist world. So Primakov knew that it is not the case. That's why he said that we need to balance and we need to use China against the United States. And I believe that Putin thinks that it's something that he's doing. But the facts are absolutely different on the ground. China is a champion of the electronic vehicles electronic vehicle market simply because Russia, because of the sanctions, lost all those importers from Europe and the United States, and China just filled the gap of this market
immediately.
And a lot of other things are happening just because Russia, contrary to its economic interests, contrary to the interests of a lot of people in Russia, and I'm talking about ordinary people, not those around Putin, he decided to have this confrontation with the West, to have this genocidal war against Ukraine that has never provoked and has never been a threat to Russia, potential threat, even a member of NATO, if it was a neighbor in NATO. So we are talking about irrationality, and we are talking about the, let's say, perception of other countries and the wishful thinking that Russia may manage to be in confrontation with the West, but not to fall as a junior partner or prey of stronger power.
Which Russia already is a junior partner, whatever Putin thinks about. Stable global economy. Sounds so good, so I can't help myself but to finish this lovely conversation, to thank you so very much for the hope and for your expertise. And hope to see you very soon in the studio.
Thank you for having me, for sure.
You're welcome. A diplomat, a foreign affairs and security policy expert and Center for Defense Strategies, Alexander Hara was in this very studio, believe it or not. That was UATV English and me, Henry Keane. Thank you so very much. That is it for this episode and this week. Thank you so very much for your time. It was me, Henry Keane, and UATV English. We did our best to deliver the hard truth in easy terms for you. Don't be shy. Please like us in return. Subscribe and comment. Your voice matters as it helps Ukrainian voice to be heard globally. Stay safe and tune for more already next week. Goodbye.